Morning all. Hope you all had a great Christmas and a great New Year. For the first time in I think 2 weeks it stopped raining and the sun is out and I had to get out and do a walk. It's a case of finding somewhere I hadn't been to that's fairly local to Peterborough, so I'm going to have a look around Upton today. Where's Upton, you might say? Well, it's always on the signposts on the way out towards Wanford on the A47. It's actually not far, about a mile away from Aylesworth, but very few people visit Upton, myself included, because the roads kind of don't go anywhere else except Upton. But I'm going to have a look around today. There's a few interesting buildings here, a few curiosities, and I'm going to wander around, see if I can make sense of it all. It wasn't in the Domesday Book, but it's got a Roman heritage. There are links to Roman times. I think there's field enclosures, if you're into your archaeology, that suggest it was around before Roman times as well. But it started to hit maps from about, or references from about 1100, 1200 onwards. And yeah, it's been established here as a hamlet for what, 1,000 years plus now. Never bigger than about 100 people. It is a hamlet rather than a village. But yeah, there's a few curiosities here that I intend to have a look at today. So Upton, here we come in the sunshine. Just approaching the edges now of Upton, and this is Model Farm, which struck me as a bit of a strange name until I did a little bit of research into what a model farm was, and it dates back to the Victorian days, or at least the concept of the model farm dates back to Victorian times. This farm itself and the building on the right, which is a farmhouse, dates back to the late 1600s, but it was set up as a model farm. Model farms exploded all over the country in the Victorian era, late Victorian, second half of the 1800s in other words, because agriculture in terms of the sciences of fertilizers and pesticides and farming methods and even machinery, steam-powered machinery. It was just massive changes going on in the world of agriculture, and big landowners, and that includes this one, which is the Fitzwilliam estate, set up a model farm to try and teach its tenant farmers the new technologies, in the hope that those tenant farmers would improve their yields by using new techniques, because they were still using sort of horse-drawn machinery in those days, you know, embrace the new technology, post-industrial revolution, and as I say, improve the yields for their benefit and for the landowners' benefit. And this was one of those model farms. They never lasted too long. The technology moved so fast that it left them behind after about 20 to 30 years. So this dates, I think, to about 1880s, 1885. That's the first time it started to appear as model farm in local newspaper archives. But the thing that's always interested me are those buildings with the arches, because as a bit of a railway buff, I always thought these were old, disused railway sheds, and they're not. They date back way before they could possibly be railway sheds, and there's no railway too close to here. You've got the Wansford to Stamford line about a mile and a half away, but it would not have had this sort of infrastructure to supply places like this. These are steam engine sheds, but not railway engine sheds, but traction engines, steam tractors, anything had a big chimney on, and they needed those arches to basically get them indoors. They're fantastic. They're not actually listed buildings. They should be, but yeah, fantastic looking buildings they are. They're actually built as extensions on the original barn buildings, which are behind it and out of sight. But yeah, they're very eye-catching, those big archways. As you can probably just about make out, sitting in front of those big archways are a couple of, in fact, railway wagons, railway trucks, call them what you like, which are obviously being used as storage. Now, they could have come from the Wansford to Stamford line, but it could have come from anywhere, I guess. Good to see them still in use. I should guess the middle one Looks to be the old original barn. The two either side, which are pretty much identical, are the extensions that have been added on in the, well, at the time it became a model farm. My guess around the 1880s, but the original one is in the middle. This is the old farmhouse for model farm. Dates back to 1685. There's a date stamp somewhere on the wall, but I doubt we shall see that. Yeah, 1685. It's pretty old. Ironically, although the farm buildings are not listed, and probably should be, this wall here is Grade 2 listed. Why that is Grade 2 listed and not everything else, I don't know. I suppose it's probably because it's unspoilt, hasn't been touched since it was built, and this dates back to just after the building of the house, around about 1700. This makes it pretty old and still standing. I did read reference somewhere that this is an exceptionally old, no longer used, but an exceptionally old post box. If I've got any details, I'll add them to the screen, but yeah, it's blocked up now, but very, very old indeed. Just coming onto Church Walk now, which is really the main road through the village. Sorry, hamlet. Mustn't call it a village. Just noticed there's a very, very early snowdrops out here. Wasn't expecting to see those. Very early. On the left here, which is about the biggest house in Upton, it's Glebe House, built in 1912. Used to be the vicarage, isn't anymore. It's a bit unusual really, because the church is at the other end of Upton, but I'm assured it was originally the vicarage. Actually looks a bit older than 1912, but 1912 was when it was built. Used to have the old village hall, which I wanted to see. It was only demolished about 20 years ago, just in front of this green hedge where this gateway is. Used to be a sort of, it's only a small enlarged shed, but it had a bit of character to it. I've seen photographs, but it's gone. Must have gone in the last 20 years. The buildings coming up on the left were built in the 1950s. I think most of them were council houses originally. In front of them there used to be a row of old cottages. I've got some maps that show that. But yeah, they used to have some old thatched, a whole range of cottages. I say a whole range, I think there's only 3 or 4 side by side. But these were built up behind those cottages, and then the cottages were demolished. I think 1959 they went. I'd rather see the cottages, to be honest with you, but they were probably past the point where they were going to stand for much longer. Up in the distance on the left there is known as Primrose Cottage now. It used to be 4 cottages, used to be farm workers' cottages. It's now one glorious big cottage, as is often the case with these. They get converted from fairly mundane premises into gigantic luxurious cottages dating back to the mid-1800s. There is an older cottage a bit further along the road, which I hope to see, which goes back to about the 1600s. Nice old K6 style phone box on the right there with a defibrillator in it. That's Primrose Cottage. I think it's called Primrose Cottage. It was on one of the maps I looked at. But so there used to be, you can see it used to be 4 cottages, now only 1. Probably isn't called Primrose Cottage anymore. The one on the right there, which is Keeper's Cottage, used to be 3 cottages and is now only 1. This one on the left is the really old one. 1500s, 1600s, rebuilt in 1950s I believe, but dates back. It was in a derelict state before they rebuilt it. Keeper's Cottage. You can see the doorway there of one of the cottages that is no more. Looking back at Keeper's Cottages, that used to be 3. You can see a doorway on the left. There still is a doorway in the middle, and there's another faint doorway on the far right. 1600s to 1700s. Old. Not as old as that one. As I say, that used to go back to 1500s, 1600s sort of time. Became derelict and then was rebuilt, or restored if you prefer, in 1957. Right, we're walking across the path now to this interesting looking church, which is, well, it just seems off the beaten track. But reading a few old documents, there used to be a lot of pathways. Well, we're on one now. It used to be an old series of old medieval pathways that used to intersect here, so it kind of made more sense in the past than it does now. Just up ahead, you can probably just make out there is a path crossing this one from right to left. That is pretty much on the course of, in fact I think it's pretty much spot on the course of, might be a few yards out, but I think it's bang on the course of what is now known as King Street, which is a Roman road, unusual Roman road. We've encountered this before in one of my previous videos. It kind of comes off Ermine Street down near Aylesworth and travels north to rejoin Ermine Street somewhere in sort of southern Lincolnshire. And I never could work out the point of it. Why not just stay on Ermine Street? It's almost like a bypass, but it doesn't bypass anything. But it is, or was, a Roman road, which underlines the Roman heritage of Upton, and might, well, I can't say it makes more sense of this church, because this church wouldn't have been here in Roman times, but you can bet your bottom dollar there probably was something built on this site of significance to Roman times, and they've just plonked a church on it. St John the Baptist Church, Upton. As with most churches in this neck of the woods, dates back to Norman times. It is a Norman church, so they reckon about 1120 was when it was built, if you want to be completely spot on. But like all of these Norman churches, massively changed, or significantly changed, in the centuries following, right up to the 1800s. It was being modified. It's unusual. It doesn't have a tower. It was originally a sort of, I think they called it a chapel of ease. It was a kind of almost satellite church to Castor and St Kyneburg, or St Kyneborough in Castor, and the vicar used to sort of shuffle between the two. I think it still is. I'm not 100% sure on that. I couldn't clarify it. It is Upton's church. But I think the vicar who operates here on sort of like monthly services is going to be the person from Castor, so they are still linked. It's Grade 1 listed. Looks like some repair work to the roof is being carried out. There you go. If you're a quick reader, you can read that. And if you're not, hit the pause button and read it. You'll have to take my word for this. Well, you can look it up if you don't believe me, but these small stones resting against the sort of northern side of the church are, well, they're not gravestones because they don't seem to be attached to the ground in any way, shape or form, but they are for working farm dogs, believe it or not. They are sort of pet graves. The big one isn't, I don't think, but the smaller ones, yeah, it's a sort of pet cemetery. I don't know if these were sited somewhere slightly differently before, but they were reported as being against the north wall quite some time back, so maybe they've always been here. But yeah, they're commemorative of the hard-working farm dogs from around here. Seems to be a grave of some significance. I like to pick on a gravestone, see if I can research and find out something about the person that was buried there. In loving memory of Sarah, the beloved wife of John Thomas Griffin, born March the 14th, 1849, died March the 28th, 1909. And I believe Thomas is listed underneath, so I suppose it's a family grave. I'll see if I can find out anything, and if I do, it will be zooming along or posted on the bottom of this screen any moment. Unfortunately we can't, and I never expected to either, access the inside of the church, which is a shame. There is a spectacular monument in there for such a small church, to Sir William Dove and his two wives, which dates back to 1600 or the 1600s. The Dove family lived in the Manor house, which is alongside the church, as we'll see in a minute. Sir William Dove was the son of one of the bishops of Peterborough at the time. So they were the big name in this immediate area. And yeah, there's a spectacular monument in there. I'll put some pictures up so you can get a flavour of it. The remains of the manor house, we'll get a better shot of it in a minute, are directly in front of us. But in the foreground is an old 1600s, or remains of an old 1600s sundial, which was erected by the Bishop of Peterborough, Bishop Dove, who with his family lived at the manor house in the 1600s. Indeed, he owned the manor until 1750, when the Fitzwilliams took over. It's an unusual thing. I'm Told it used to be, well, I was told it is 6 feet tall. Whether it means it was 6 feet, it's not. It's about 6 feet tall, in fairness. Yeah, I'll take that back. It is about 6 feet tall. I presume there was something on top of it. I'm not an expert on sundials. If that is it, I don't know how it works, but yeah, unusual. Very unusual. Over 400 years old, is that? That's the only remaining section of what was Upton Manor House, built in the late 1500s. Went to the Dove family as a Bishop of Peterborough in the 1600s, early 1600s, and the Doves were there until it went to the Fitzwilliams, and that was in 1750. And for some reason, the Fitzwilliams demolished most of it. This is the only bit still remaining, and I suppose he had a bigger house elsewhere. There's a few buildings around the back, but they're of a more modern build. I think it's probably those buildings to the right. I think they were built a couple of hundred years later. The farm up ahead is Manor Farm, which is the other big farm really in and around Upton. Pretty obvious name, I guess. Got to try and skirt around here if we can. Nice house. That through the bushes there in the distance, just bear with me a second. That's an old dovecot, dates to somewhere in the 1700s. So that would have been, well, it would have been on site quite early. Didn't get demolished by the Fitzwilliams. Still just about standing, being used for purposes other than housing doves. For food. Can see what looks like a stile over in the hedge in the distance, and a little track. Looks like a very old wall over there. Probably walled in the estate around the manor house, I'd guess. Looks quite old, particularly to the right. Just swinging around past the farm. My final sort of, well, I don't know if I'm going to find this, my final quest here is, I've got to get round the back of these woods and come back in again, but somewhere in that direction are what I believe to be a series of medieval fish ponds. I'll put them up on a map. As you can see, they're clearly marked, not as fish ponds, but they're clearly marked as ponds, and you can see from the shape of those ponds that they look to me to have been dammed up, and that's exactly what would have happened if they were fish ponds. And they're right on the edge of what I think was just a big walled part of the manor house estate. So yeah, that's my final, probably most difficult quest here, is to find those fish ponds, because I think they're actually in the woods now. They've been consumed by the trees, but we shall see. Right, this is the little pond, which I'll mark on the map so you can see where we're at. I don't know, I can't see a stream feeding this. I don't know if there's a spring involved, but this is the first of those ponds, so I need to really get round the back of this somehow. Let's go and have a wander. Looks like a bit of a beaten track. Certainly flowing water there, so there's a water source on the other side of that pond that we've just seen. Even though I couldn't see it, it could well be a spring, not marked on the map as a spring. But this little feeder should go from that original pond, according to the map, to a much bigger one, which I think's up ahead. There it is, hidden away. Obviously it would have looked a lot tidier back in the day, but I'm always fascinated by fish ponds. If you had a manor house or a house of any significant size back in the medieval years, you'd have a fish pond. Why? Because, you know, we were a much more God-fearing nation back then, and there were, I think I read somewhere, over 100 days of fasting during the year when you could not eat meat. And unlike the sort of vegetarian, vegan, call it what you like, definitions of today, fish was not considered as meat. So you had a fish pond and you would carefully nurture and grow fish like carp and eels and pike, and on those fasting days you would come and harvest fish from here for the table, and every good manor house had one. And the structure, as you can see on the map on here, is of like two ponds with a link between them. They used to have an upper pond which would have been this one, which was probably quite a lot bigger and deeper and tidier. Back in the day, it wasn't buried by trees, as you can see on the map, but this is where the fish would be left to naturally look after themselves. They probably fed them, I mean, I don't know, but the lower pond would have been where they would have moved them to clean them up and prepare them for harvesting for the table. So they would just use one for growing the fish and the other one for moving them on to the next stage, ready for being harvested. I'll try and find the other pond now. Just moved around the other side of the same pond now. This is the middle one. You can see it's quite a lot larger than it looked a few seconds ago. A few trees and branches have collapsed and quite a few trees growing out of it, which would not have been here when they were being used as fish ponds. So you remove all the greenery and the trees from here, it's quite a sizable, in fact a very sizable fish pond. I was trying to look for the evidence that the one end had been dammed. It clearly has been, according to the map, and it would need to be dammed to create this, because I'm sure originally it was just a stream. I'll see if I can find that somewhere down that far end on the left. Well, that's the end of the middle pond, right in the centre. You can see the water escaping just below where I'm at. So The dam is, just an earth dam that's been built up. You can see it's been banked up there, and that's what was used to block the stream here to create that pond. And this stream should now flow down into the third and final, the cleansing pool, which I should now go and find. That's the third pond. They just look like overgrown swamps now, but you have to try and imagine all this growth, all these trees, all these bushes were not here when it was being managed as fish ponds. Another very sizable pool. See a bridge. I'll fall over first. That's pond number 3, the final pond, and the water escaping. It's a lovely sizable piece of something down here. Not sure what the story behind that is, but I suspect that hasn't moved for quite some time. It's possible it used to sit at the top of the stream when it meets the pond, because they wouldn't have let the water flow out as freely as this if there was fish in here that they were about to eat. And I suspect that pipe was something to do with the exit point. At a guess, there's no other reason why it would be here. There'd be no buildings here. Bit strange on all the old maps, going right back to the early 1800s that I've got. This little lane to the left here, which we're just coming up to, is marked as Blind Lane, and it still is Blind Lane today. It is a bit weird because it's kind of just a track. Would it be worthy of a name? It obviously back in, I would suggest, 1700s, if not older than that. It was a well-trodden track. I guess it runs across to what is now Model Farm and goes from there in a direct route to where we are now, in the grounds of the Manor House. But yes, Blind Lane. I did look up why they call lanes Blind Lane. It simply means it goes nowhere. That's literally what was defined when I googled it, which is about right. It doesn't really go anywhere. But as I say, it appears on maps going back hundreds of years. But I won't go down. I think I'm going to go back through the village, see if we missed anything. Sorry, hamlet. Must stop calling it village. Go back through the hamlet. There's a distant view of Upton just to show how diminutive it is and why it's more a hamlet than a village. In the distance there you've got Model Farm, and then as it swings round you've got Glebe House in the centre there, which in itself only dates back 100 years. And then you've got what used to be a small row of thatched farm workers' cottages and are now sort of former council houses, late 1950s. And then you only pick up the older part of the village here where the older cottages were, which we shall see again in a moment. And that's it. And the manor house, of course. Certainly no shortages of walkways here. Grab yourself a map, work out your own route. There's plenty of them. That would be a nice view of the old church in that natural archway, if it wasn't for the scaffolding, unfortunately. Just looking at the field that sits between the church and the village and noticing all these bumps and lumps. Could be anything really. There's supposed to be evidence of old ridge and furrow fieldscapes here. Again, all medieval stuff really. I don't know if that's what I'm looking at. It doesn't look very straight. Is it something to do with the old enclosures that they say have been found around here? It seems a bit too obvious really, but there'll be a reason. It's not natural. Never like walking over these things. Made it. As you said earlier, the one on the right here is the very earliest 1500s, 1600s, which is very old. Cottage, restored in the 1950s, but it's always been there in some form. It was just got a bit derelict. Most of the rest of them are really just old farm workers' cottages that have been modified into one big cottage. As I said earlier, you can see the old door marks on these cottages where there used to be separate doors. The phone box is grade 2 listed, believe it or not, or at least is being considered for grade 2 listings because it's apparently in a perfect idyllic rural setting. And why not? This one isn't listed. I don't know why, because this is a lovely cottage. But it's not listed. It obviously isn't as old as it maybe looks. I was reading somewhere that when the row of old thatched cottages was here before they were demolished in 1959, they only had one tap, one water tap between them, and it was in the road, or on the edge of the road in those days, because the cottages were right up, butted up to the edge of the road. And it said that the drain for that one tap is still here today in the road. And I don't know, how do you identify it? What does it mean by drain? There's some manhole covers, but I think it's not going to be those, but who knows. But they would be immediately to our right now, those cottages. And yeah, they just shared a single tap between them all. I suspect, don't get too excited, I suspect it's there. Yeah, that's my guess. Doesn't get more exciting than that, eh? As I said earlier, the old corrugated metal roofed village hall, which was around for some time and was the one and only mini community place, really, youth clubs and all that sort of stuff for the hamlet of Upton. It's where it resided, somewhere around here. I think it was probably where there is now a driveway and a gate. That's where it used to be. I'll put a picture up. It's the only picture I've got that shows a little bit of it. It appears on old maps to be right there. Pity it's gone. So it only went about 20 years ago. Right, that's it, back to the car now. If I can remember where I put it, somewhere near Aylesworth. That's Upton for you. I quite enjoyed that, a small walk, but very quiet, very peaceful, under blue skies and a bit of sunshine too. So I hope you found something of interest there. I will be going out and doing a few more once I decide where it is that I'm going to go. Any comments you want to make, as ever, whack them under the video on Peterborough Images, or if you're on YouTube, you can post your comments on there as well. If you've not subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do. I'd love to get a few more on board than we've got. There's a little button in the bottom right of your screen if you watched it on your phone. Just click on that. It's harmless. It just means you'll be notified. I think that's how it works. You'll get notified in some form on YouTube. If you go on YouTube that there's a new video to watch, that's all it does. And that's it. See you again. Thank you for watching.